Recently, this area has been troubled by an odd crime spree. Very odd and very disturbing. 3 goat heads were left on the porches of 3 homes in an affluent neighborhood, and 1 goat head was nailed to a homemade cross and left outside a church in an adjacent and similarly affluent neighborhood. Police were alerted and an investigation ensued. You don't throw goat heads around in affluent neighborhoods without provoking an immediate reaction. That investigation was spearheaded by the police department's GoatHead Tactical Unit, which consisted of 2 officers, Detective Edgar Zemansky, known to fellow officers as Pick, and Sergeant Charles Frederick Victor Emmanuel Bach. That's B-O-C-K, no relation, although the sergeant does play the organ. Both men are specially trained in criminal activity that has any type of goat head involvement. Detective Zemansky said that a detailed analysis of all 4 crime scenes led him to conclude that there was no occult connection. In crimes like this, he said, if there is a satanic cult behind it, there will be other indicators besides the goat head. Typically, we might see the inverted pentagram or the cloven hoof or 666. We didn't find any of that, so we ruled it out. Next, the GHTU checked to see if these families, as well as the church, had been specifically targeted, possibly by a disgruntled employee or anyone with a grudge. No connection among the 4 could be discovered other than the upscale locale itself, so that too was eliminated as a possible motive for the crime. That left the officers with a crank, possibly with a social agenda, somebody with a thing for the upper middle class, and it was being treated as a misdemeanor crime, a combination of littering, trespassing, disturbing the peace, and abuse of a goat's head. We take it seriously because people become alarmed when they find something like this on their property, said Detective Zemansky. It's very unusual behavior, to say the least, and they wonder if something else is going to follow it. One of the families in the case has temporarily vacated their residence. They're very upset. We are determined to find the person or persons responsible for this. The Department of Homeland Security contacted Detective Zemansky, and after speaking with him and reviewing the evidence, namely the 4 goat's heads, which are being stored in a locker in the county morgue, it was decided that they would not issue a national alert in the color aspic, indicating a threat to the country from goat head terrorists. We convinced them that this was strictly limited and a local problem, Detective Zemansky said. They've been on pins and needles about this ever since somebody stuck that goat head on the statue of Harry Carey in Chicago, and then the Stan Musial in St. Louis, Bob Feller in Cleveland, and Hank Aaron in Atlanta. There is absolutely no link to baseball here. We were able to assure them that this was completely separate from any of that, and they agreed to stand down. He also heard from several animal rights organizations, and I told them in no uncertain terms that we would handle this, he said. It's bad enough as it is. We're not going to allow special interest groups to step in and turn it into something it's not. Sergeant Bach obtained videotape from the only store in this area that sells goat's heads, and interviewed the people who had purchased a goat head within the past 2 months. I did not think this was going to amount to anything because no one had bought more than 1, he said, and the buyers in each case purchased other items that would lead you to believe that they were following a recipe, but we followed it up according to ordinary police procedure. The first person Sergeant Bach spoke with was a Carrie Abramanyu. A reporter accompanied the officer. He knocked on the door when it was opened. He had displayed his badge and said, "Good day. I am Sergeant Charles Bach. I'm with the police department. Did you recently purchase a goat's head?" "About a month ago. Is that a crime?" "Not in and of itself. What did you do with the goat's head?" "Why do you want to know?" "Could you answer my question, please?" "No. This is making me nervous. Do I need an attorney?" "Only if you know a lawyer who specializes in cases involving goat's heads." "It so happens I do. Nikolai Bannerman. He's with Arden Craft." "Look, there's no need for that. I haven't accused you of any criminal activity." "Not yet. I just want to know why you bought a goat's head." "To make soup. But are you going to believe me? That's the question. You say you made goat's head soup. That's right, my wife and I lived for years in the Caribbean because of my job. We both love that soup. It reminds us of many pleasant days spent in the tropics. Mr. Abramanu, do you have any of the soup that you say you made? Yeah, we do. We froze some of it. It freezes very well, by the way. Would you like to try some? If you don't mind. Nope, come on in. I hope you're hungry. Sergeant Bach had a bowl of the soup, which was very spicy, but as it happens, Sergeant Bach is a big fan of chili, the hotter the better, so the heat did not bother him. In fact, he got a copy of the recipe for the soup and intends to make a batch of it himself. Because you use the entire head of the goat in preparing the dish, the recipe yields a substantial amount of the soup. However, as Mr. Abramanu noted, it does freeze well. Sergeant Bach had similar luck with 3 other buyers, each of whom had used the head of the goat for cooking. 2 held parties, so there were no leftovers, but many witnesses to corroborate the fact that the goat head had indeed been cooked for a feast. At the 4th address, Sergeant Bach ate another bowl of the soup, which had been frozen. The person who made this soup happened to be a professional musician who developed his taste for the soup while playing on cruise ships. There was an electric organ visible in the next room, so after he finished eating the soup, the sergeant offered to, so to speak, sing for his supper by playing a selection, and the resident readily agreed. So the sergeant ripped through a rousing version of Pinball Wizard from the Who's rock opera, Tommy. That did nothing to advance the investigation, but Sergeant Bach got a charge out of it, and his audience applauded as lustily as one can do. That left Sergeant Bach satisfied with regard to the innocence of the people on the store videotape, as well as his caloric intake for the day, but it left the GHTU with no clues, no leads, and an apparent dead end in their investigation. Sergeant Bach, unlike his partner, was not completely comfortable in eliminating the possibility of satanic involvement. Pick's sure about that, but I keep seeing that one head nailed to the cross in front of the church, he said. That one bothers me. I think that might mean something. There's a long, dark history here, going back to Pan and running through the goat of Mendez, the black goat, the goat of 1,000 young, the Judas goat, and the scapegoat. Those who are into this, the occult, they use symbols with an inner meaning that is obvious to them, but hidden from unbelievers, like you and me. We could have the clues we need right in front of us and not know it, but we'll keep at it. We're a small unit. There's only so much we can do. Detective Szymanski was following a more practical trail. A goat's head will run you about $25, he said. So with 4 of them, that's at least 100, which makes this an expensive prank. Which leads me to believe there's something more behind this than the frat boys, although we're not discounting frat boys either. Whoever it was, we figured they bought the heads in another location, transported them here, and then set them out, which would, by the way, make this a felony crime, interstate transport of animal parts, and that would bring in the FBI, along with probably the FDA, but you didn't hear that from me. That is, unless they're raising their own goats, said Sergeant Bach. Farmers, or maybe even the Taliban. Detective Szymanski frowned. We're keeping that to ourselves, he said. Right, said Sergeant Bach. No sense putting the goat before the cart. The 2 officers chuckled, and Detective Szymanski continued. Now, as to why they chose the places where they left them, whether it was random or not, I think that's a key, but we can't say. It could be that they had something against just one of the people and left the others to make the case more confusing, cover their tracks by leaving multiple tracks, if you follow me. If so, they were successful. We have no suspects and we cannot discern a motive at this time. All we can do at this point is to keep the case open and hope that one of the perpetrators brags about it to someone who might give us a call. That, or maybe they'll try it again and slip up. That's the thing with people who commit crimes with goat's heads. We've studied them. We have a profile on them. By just about any society's standards, they're crazy. They're not cautious. They make mistakes. And we're waiting for them.